Hello and welcome to this week's review on Dragon Ball Daima. This week I'm reviewing the episode Chatty, and we kick off this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives, all the things I enjoyed about this particular episode, and we kick off by talking about the headline positives. This is an episode that feels richly like a classic Dragon Ball episode. The humour, once again, is very much on point, and the way that it teases for future things is interesting. Thanks to daylight savings, I get to watch this one a little bit earlier than usual. It means I actually get time to eat and watch the news and such. Woohoo! What a treat? Whatever. Anyway, this episode feels a lot like a classic Dragon Ball episode all the way through it. I know that I've kind of been saying that a lot from the previous few episodes, with the exception of the second episode, because not a whole lot of much of anything really happened in this one, but this is the one that ends up having that feel the most with it. It has the feel of the little episode that we had with Monster Carrot, and if I'm remembering correctly, during the Dragon Ball anime, there is a filler episode with two bandits and enchanted water flask gourd thing, which they use to extend their lives, which, you know, very much feels like a connection to this strange device that we see later on in the episode, which is a wonderfully sinister creation, and well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to that and discuss that all in greater detail shortly. But I still feel that this episode really does play into that tone and feeling of the show just beyond that. The couple running that little remote cafe and the whole business with the Sky Seed stuff, and the old guy running it being hard of hearing but also having that wild sense of showmanship and salesmanship. Just before they fire the Sky Seed off into the sky, it had a light-hearted goofiness that I really found kind of endearing, and it helps to set up a little bit of a foreshadowing of a subversion of expectations later, with the Sky Seed turning out to just being a cannon, and our cast just being thrown through the sky like they're just on the back of a rocket. Almost like Major Kong from Doctor Strangelove from a certain point of view. Like, the whole sequence of events is just really fun and charming, and I will admit that with an episode like this, where so much of it works for me, and so much of it just has this really just familiar yet new feeling to it, that a lot of what I like about this episode once again comes down to vibes, which, whilst talking about television programs and movies and anything within the arts is an incredibly subjective business, talking about vibes and feelings is something that's so subjective that it can be hard to articulate, because this, at the end of the day, really appeals to a sense of... well, it really does feel like the version of Dragon Ball that I enjoyed the most. As I've gotten older, I've gained a greater appreciation for the original Dragon Ball series on the earlier half of Z, where they were going on all these adventures and such. It's part of the reason why I enjoy a lot of the filler stuff in Z, and to a certain degree within Super, because we get to see our cast going on these adventures and seeing strange things and doing weird things, which is something that I think that Dragon Ball as a series overall has gotten far too far away from, and has been so obsessed with superpowers and going a level beyond, a level beyond, a level beyond every other storyline, that core spirit of adventure has been lost, and to have it back now is just something that I just really do love. And this is an episode that really plays into that in a way which I am just floored by. It has a charm to it that is really hard to describe. Apologies if it feels as though some really weird edit points are in this episode. I think I'm coming down with a bit of cold, so that's the reason why. Of course, one of the big things a lot of people are going to be talking about with this episode is the fusion bugs. Yeah, there's no other way to put it. I think that's going to be one of the two major takeaways with this particular episode. As we remember in this episode, Goku and the others are in this little cafe, and they go over to what they think is going to be a bunch of candy, like a weird Demon Realm pick and mix, but it turns out those aren't candies, those are bugs. Medicinal bugs, or medibugs, as they end up calling them, which I think is like a public service announcement thing in the UK, or something along those lines. So I'm just getting visions of a commercial just talking about all these different medical devices in my head. But anyway, so these end up ranging from, you know, helping with mild things like just going off some of the designs of some of the diagrams you have. You know, you get a few burns, so you take something to get rid of your burns. You get a headache, you take one to have a headache, and then then they end up discussing what is the Senzu bean equivalent. And when that came along, I will admit it got a little bit of an eye roll for me, because of Yeah, I think it's a little too early to bring in the sensu being surrogate for my money. Like, look, I know that at some point or another they're going to get into some big major fight and it's going to take a lot out of them, but yeah, I think that I speak for a lot of people when I say that I think sensu beans have become a little bit too much of a crutch within the main series since they were introduced back in Dragon Ball, and it's just gotten worse and worse as time has gone by, and having one brought in so quickly into all of this, I don't know how to feel about it, but with that said, I am a little bit more responsive to the fact that they're introducing it so early, and by the looks of things, Goku doesn't exactly have a limitless supply of them, so it'll end up having to be used when it's most necessary, and let's be honest, this series has only got about 20 episodes in it, so it doesn't really give much time for respite care and, and the like, so okay, I'll give a little bit of a forgiveness for that. However, the big one, like I say, that a lot of people are going to end up talking about is the fusion bug, allowing two people to fuse after eating it. Yeah, I definitely think this is one of the things that the internet is going to go potty over, especially the YouTubers who have theorised that fusion might be in this series and totally didn't know that ahead of time due to plot leaks. Not naming any names there. I think it will be interesting to see exactly how and what they end up doing with all of this, the direction that they end up going with it, because look, I'm curious to see what kind of form this fusion will take when it eventually ends up coming into this series. Is it going to be like one of the ones that we've seen before, or is it going to be something wholly new and different? I'm hoping that it'll be something that's wholly new and different and isn't just the previous fusion forms that we've seen over the course of this entire series. You know, I don't want a form that just looks like the Patara fusion or just the fusion dance fusion. I want something that has a distinct look and feel to it which will have its own character and charm. I will end up feeling as though it's something that's will have a legacy beyond this series, beyond the fact that it's just the final piece, sadly, by Akira Toriyama himself. I do feel as though it is likely to end up being one that we know, though, which I hope isn't the case. I hope that whatever form that it ends up taking will have a great creative flair to it and produce something that will stand out and will get people talking about this series and to really bring people into it. I'm still a little bit skeptical of all of this. I had this feeling that fusion would be introduced or reintroduced to all of this at some point in the future, because they're going to end up having to have a situation where all of this ends up narrow, just really neatly focusing itself up so it ties up with the beginning of Super. So we're going to have Kibito and the Supreme Kai fusing, so they can be in that state when Super inevitably kicks off in this whole series of events. The fact that we're actually going to have Goku and Vegeta fusing at some point in this season is an interesting idea, like I say, but at the same time there's a part of me that has feelings about that we'll end up going into greater detail later on in this review. Now, to be fair, all this stuff with these Medibugs, it seems to be just like a very limited supply of it from what little that we end up seeing of the pouch that Goku has on it. So it's not going to be something that's going to be overused. It's going to be used sparingly and at points in the story where it's probably going to be most effective. And there no doubt will be some point or another in this storyline where they'll be going, oh well, I'm really bust up and I really need help, but we've only got one of these Medibug things what we can use to heal him, so do we use it now or do we use it later? Like, that would be a nice way to go about it. We'll see where all of it goes. It feels like a very weird way of signposting stuff. Well, it feels very deliberate signposting, but we'll see where all that goes. But like I say, I'm not done talking about the fusion bug stuff. The other major thing that I think a lot of Dragon Ball YouTubers will be talking about in the coming hours will be picking up on what Glorio said when he referred to the Demon Realm's Dragon Balls as being the original. I can see this ultimately going one of two ways. This will either be met with, wow, such lore, and people just going into detail about what they think that all that means, and just how they think about it, whether they think it's a neat idea or a bad idea. Either way, they'll be discussing it from the point of view of something of a degree of a measured response to it, regardless of whether they like it or not. Alternatively, you're going to have a lot of people going, oh my god, they just made Super non-canon! Because, you know, the fact that there are Dragon Balls in the Demon Realm, and the fact that someone has said that they are the original Dragon Balls, means that the Super Dragon Balls magically now no longer exist. Because that's the conclusion that a lot of people are going to end up coming to. Because there's a lot of people that are desperate to declare, oh my god, they've just made Dragon Ball Super non-canon. even though there's nothing to suggest that being the case either within the material within the series itself or at a meta level from the sheer point of view of press releases and what have you. The truth is what we know nothing about the true origins of the Dragon Balls and the order in which they were made. We do know that the Super Dragon Balls were made by Zalama, I believe their name is, and we still don't know whether or not they were a Namekian, or that the Namekians just merely came up with their own equivalency, or they were taught by Zalama or whatever the name is at some point in the past. We don't really know that, and you can always end up drawing this out if you don't like the idea that the Demon Realm Dragon Balls were the original. You can always draw it down to it being unreliable narrator syndrome, because let's be honest, how would Glorio know one way or the other? He's only learnt that that Earth has its own set of Dragon Balls relatively recently, so it could just be him coming to the conclusion that, well, seeing as Earth's Dragon Balls were made by Namekians and all the Namekians came from the Demon Realm, that makes the Demon Realms the original Dragon Balls. We don't know how that fits in the wider cosmology of Dragon Ball as far as the Super Dragon Balls. That's something we may well find out in a future storyline, in a future series. But for the tier now, I really don't think people should get their knickers in a twist over this. Because again, I think there's a lot of paranoia with this series. There's a lot of people that are desperately afraid that this series is going to invalidate Super in some way, shape or form. Even though most of the stuff that we've had which has been contradictory to the stuff that we have seen in Dragon Ball Super has just been a lot of really minor stuff that just feels more like clarifications. You know, like Akira Toriyama's going through his old notes in his own scripts and going, yeah, that wasn't really a cool idea, was it? Let's redo that one. I mean, it's only a little thing. I can't imagine people get upset by that. And, well, we all know how certain segments of the Dragon Ball fandom can be, and, well, fandom more generally. I think that as a whole entity, regardless of what I think about them and what I will end up saying about them later on, I do think these Teases are interesting, even if I do feel as though they have overplayed their hand rather heavily with one of them. I still think that this episode as a whole entity does retain this great spirit of adventure. Yeah, that phrase, I'm using it again. And this great sense of humour throughout of it. The bit where they're flying through the sky on the back of the Sky Seed and everyone's freaking out is, you know, a fun little moment and is well animated. The action, once again, is great. I say, feeling like original Dragon Ball, yet taken to the next level with better cinematography, better choreography, and has just a sheer flair and dynamism to it, thanks to the fact that it has a bigger animation budget and has had more time to cook. They're not having to rush this out for a week-by-week deadline. They've had, what is it, 2 years to work on all of this, and it really does show. We're getting almost cinema quality animation every single week. Everything that we get in the village is on point, both in terms of the tone of it, but the feel of it, and just everything about it. Like I say, this genuinely does feel like a call back to classic Dragon Ball in the best possible way. It's Goku and his friends coming across a small village on their journeys and discovering some nasty ne'er-do-well and roustabout is in the area, and now they have to deal with them, saving the villagers, one great adventure after the other. And I really do like that. Like I've said previously, the spirit of adventure is something that's been absent from Dragon Ball for such a long time, and just getting a feel of it in the here and now, particularly given how well it's all animated and put together, is great. This weird jar thing that they use to steal people's potential life energy is just creepy and weird, but at the same time it does feel like something that we've had in Dragon Ball before, but not in a way that feels like a heavy-handed homage, but in a way which feels consistent with just the way that all of this works. I really did enjoy that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this ends up evolving from thereafter. Now, the presence of this device makes me... It plays into that theory that I had in the previous video about the fact that the third Demon Realm level may once have been a more verdant and abundant and life-filled realm, and that it's been, over time, just stripped mined of just all its goodness. It's just had all of it blanched away from it over time, and it makes me think that these life-draining machines may have been part of that. That's maybe the reason why everything looks as crappy as all of this is because of those devices. Possibly over past generations of the Demon Kings, this land has been drained of more and more energy to keep the royal family alive, and they've taken that much from the land that now they're having to draw on more and more from the people. it will be interesting to see exactly what the exact usage of all this life energy is going to be used for, because it doesn't seem to drain vitality, it seems to drain lifespan. So how that plays into my theory, I'm not 100% certain. But we will see as it ends up going when we get into a better explanation and how it ends up working next week. Because, let's be honest, Goku and his friends are going to stop it and then just give everyone their lifespan back. Which, that's just the way to things. I will admit that whilst I was describing just the whole thing about having a device that drains life energy, I was getting visions of GT. And it's been a while since GT, so I don't know what storyline I'm thinking back to. But still, it is a common trope within Dragon Ball. Everyone goes to a place and they find someone exploiting the local populace, usually through stealing their life force of some kind. It's an interesting idea, it's a fun idea, and I've liked what they've ended up doing with it. With all that said, however, I think it is time for us to get into the negatives, and as you can probably guess, my negatives for this week are going to be with fusion bugs. Not necessarily with them in concept, but I think that this episode signposts them way too hard. Look, the introduction or reintroduction of fusion into this series, okay, fine. At this point, it's just a thing. And in the grander scheme of this storyline, or rather Dragon Ball as a wider story, it's only been a matter of months since it was last used, so the idea of it being brought back into it and being reminded isn't the worst thing in the world. The issue that I have with is how it's reintroduced narratively. Like, they dedicate a small section of this episode to effectively just saying, look at this is important, this will come into play later, pay attention to all of this. And almost has a feeling like, now if all of you behave and be good little boys and girls and watch this show, we'll give you a super great treat. You'll get to see Goku and Vegeta fusing again, and we know how much you guys really love it when they do that. Yeah, so just sit down and behave yourselves. Now, of course, I don't think it's going to be that cynical, but unless it has some kind of originality to it, unless there's something that is interesting about this design, this new form that it ends up creating, it is just going to feel a little bit cynical to me. It's a case of, okay, let's put this super cool thing in that the fans really like because we know that's going to get them on side, because, well, I'm not going to say that necessarily Akira Toriyama preempted the potential backlash this series will end up having, but let's be honest, Akira Toriyama's version of GT, even before everything went the way that it did, it got a lot of people upset and annoyed when they're expecting to just see the granola and whatever the hell the demon goat man's name was, sagas. Like, a lot of people got really pissed off that this isn't what we were getting into, so this does feel like almost like a case of keeping the peace with that, but at the same time, I can't really be too heavy on it because I've got a feeling it's probably just me being cynical at the fact there might be cynicism there. With all that said, let's get into the overview and say that even though I do have issues with exactly how the fusion bugs were introduced into all of this, this is a problem for later on. I don't think it's going to be seen that soon, and when it is brought in, it'll be brought in a way which will be fun, exciting, and genuinely thrilling. But for the here and now, I have to say that this was a good episode, another good episode that it really is hard to really talk about one way or another because it frankly works. It's a fun episode, has some great little moments in it, and it'll be interesting to see where we go with it next week. With all that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, and once again we have Big X1 who says, this episode was way better than the last. This is of course referring to last week's episode. I'm not a big fan of old Dragon Ball, but I'm liking what I see thus far. Thank you for your episode. No, thank you for your comment on the previous episode. And I understand that, as I've said over the course of this review, I know that classic Dragon Ball isn't for everybody. I know that for a lot of people, to be frank and to be fair, they grew up on Dragon Ball Z, and for them, anything that has kind of almost come before that and since then has not really lived up to that hype. I understand that. I grew up with Dragon Ball Z itself, but for me, like I said earlier on in this review, as I've got older, I've gained an appreciation for classic Dragon Ball. And, maybe when eventually they get around to continue on with Super, it'll be what I was hoping that Super would end up being in the first place, because for what it's worth, I don't think they're going to just leave money on the table here. I think that all the storylines that have been done with the Dragon Ball Super manga will be adapted at some point in an anime form. though probably with the addition of the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie being a story arc at some point or another, even if it's just a mini arc of, oh, by the way, if in case you missed it, this is what happened with it. With all that said and done, however, let me know what you thought about this particular episode. Have you enjoyed what you've been seeing thus far with Dragon Ball Daima? Let me know. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!